It's Thursday. It's the 13th day of February. Welcome to the DayWeather podcast. And as we head into the end of the week here and into the weekend, we have moderating temperatures. However, there's a but, and I'm going to get to that here in a minute. But as we go on into at least the next 24 to 48 hours, there is relief from the severe cold as the Arctic air is going to be able to come off the east slopes of the Rockies and get a little bit further out into the plains, allowing a little bit of some Pacific influence coming in because of a strong Pacific wave that's coming in off the west coast. This is going to come through the Rockies Friday and Saturday into Sunday. That will bring temperatures back down, and it's going to bring a little bit of snow, heavier amounts in the high country. Then we see this next system coming in early next week, and there's a change. I want to alert folks, you are going to probably notice, for those of you that look at the long-range forecast, whether it's on your phone or other sources, next week's forecast is changing rather dramatically, especially with temperature. Because if we remember, in previous podcasts, we talked about there was this detachment going on with the vortex of cold air over North America. It was getting detached from the main flow across the hemisphere. Well, that's ended up causing some problems. We mentioned that the models sometimes aren't going to handle that well. Well, that's exactly what's happened. We'll talk about this detached vortex here in a moment. During the second part of this podcast, I am going to take a look at what March could do. I'm really going to stick my neck out, quite honestly, but I want to kind of give you what we're seeing for how March might go in the western United States. So we have a lot of winter scenes, and of course the moon shining brightly, the full moon, and lots of moonscapes with snowscapes and icescapes across the region. Beautiful shot there from Dave Bell with a cold full moon going over Half Moon Mountain. How about that? And then Jan Curtis put together this great movie here of you can see the halo forming very faintly there, but it's there in the sub-zero temperatures in Cheyenne, Wyoming yesterday morning. And with the severe cold, if you've missed your opportunity for some moon halos or sun halos, well, you still are going to have some opportunities, as I'll show you here in a moment. You can see somebody looking really hard there at getting those driveways and those sidewalks shoveled. As we take a look, now for those of you tired of the cold, now some of you have headed south, obviously. 1 minute we're getting a picture from Eagles and frozen Lake McConaughey to Scottsdale, Arizona, but there's some palm trees for those of you who are not able to enjoy those at a moment, and a nice little wave feature in the low clouds near Chugwater with the clouds yesterday. You get a lot of interesting things when you get these Arctic air masses that come on in. Speaking of interesting things, how about this? Some of you in the western United States observed this on February 10th. This is what will happen when you get the atmospheric effects of a rocket launch in the high atmosphere as it goes up. And so folks in the western United States near Vandenberg Air Force Base, where you get a lot of rocket launches, will see things like this. So that's an incredible shot there. The cold weather bringing those brown-capped rosy finches in, especially if they're encouraged a little bit with a little bit of feed. So even the birds taking part in the Arctic chill. Very impressive wave coming into the Pacific Northwest and Northern California. This will be a big rain producer for California and Oregon, and very heavy snows. Good snowpack building snow coming out of this wave right here. You can see there's a gap, so it's going to be a quiet day across the region. Arctic air still sitting up into this region here, but the Pacific will push up against that Arctic air, and that's going to give us our moderating temperatures. Across the nation, there's a lot going on, and there will be for a while, but look to the extent of the light blue here. These are cold weather advisories deeping all the way into Oklahoma, into the Texas Panhandle, more winter weather for the Northeast and for the Great Lakes, and then you can see a whole host of winter storm warnings, winter weather advisories in the pink and the blue in the west with that Pacific wave. Then the brown areas, well, those are high wind watches and high wind warnings. Anytime that Arctic air gets to push out to the east, the wind gaps are going to have some high winds. And there you can see it very easily on the 500 millibar chart. look up north, because we're going to get back to this later. Here's the detachment. The only thing holding it together is this tiny little bridge out here off the Aleutians. But essentially, this area of extremely cold air, this little vortex of spinning Arctic air, is getting detached and is going to stay detached as we go into next week. But we have this gap right here today into early tomorrow. But as early as tonight and Friday, moisture will begin to move in. These are the winds for today into tomorrow. So here are the high winds along I-25 and Interstate 80. They're not going to be widespread, but once you get into the higher terrain of Interstate 80 between Laramie and Cheyenne, Laramie and Rawlins, you're going to have very strong winds and blowing snow. And throughout the Shirley Basin, Muddy Gap areas, and you can see in the Rocky Mountain National Park there, but a bit of a wind shadow. You can see the wind shadow showing up very well for right here. Strong winds across southern Colorado along I-25 and along I-40 into New Mexico. By Saturday morning, that wave quickly moves off the west coast and moves through. So for Friday night into Saturday morning, you're looking at the system coming in, bringing light to moderate snow to the plains, a good shot of snow to the mountains. This is not going to be a big snow producer on the plains, but it's going to produce some. Here's your vortex up here, and you're thinking, okay, it's in Hudson Bay. It's headed up into the far northeastern areas of Canada. We're done with it. However, we'll have to come back to that here in a moment. So between now and Sunday, you can see the Pacific moisture. The gradient of the moisture weakens as it goes east because the mountains catch a lot of that moisture, but nonetheless, more snow for Montana. You can see some snow getting out into the plains of Wyoming and eastern Colorado, lighter amounts here in the Dakotas. So a good plume of Pacific moisture will come on in. Snowfall looks like that through Sunday morning. So enough to cause some travel concerns, especially from Friday night into the day on Saturday. Then as we get into Monday, we have detachment again. You can see it right here of this vortex. And then we showed you this yesterday. There's a tail forming. The Arctic air is getting stretched. It's getting stretched more west to east. And with this stretching, there's a pocket of extremely cold air right here that appears to be breaking off from this main section here. And with this little low coming in off the Pacific Northwest, it's going to help draw all this Arctic air this direction. So when it looked like the Arctic air was going to shift out of the region, well, it's going to come back like a boomerang. And this is going to lead to severe cold returning next week to the northern Rockies, the northern and central plains. And this cold air is just as cold as what we've just experienced. And it actually, in some places, could get colder, believe it or not. So livestock interest in the region next week, be ready for severe cold and bitter cold wind chills, and there's going to be some snow with it. So this is by Monday. By Wednesday, there's a detachment. See how there's a break? This area of cold does start to head off, but it leaves this behind. It leaves behind a pocket of extremely cold Arctic air left over the U.S. So this is the detachment situation kind of playing out. So with that playing out, spinning off and coming back to the southwest, there's going to be a pocket of extremely cold air that's going to sit for 4 days in this region. So I'm sorry for you folks in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, a good chunk of Wyoming, into Minnesota, Wisconsin, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. Boy, it's just going to be brutal for another solid week here of severe cold. And this cold will then start to shift east and will work its way south into a lot of the U.S. So let's kind of step forward with this cold. These will be the temperature anomalies. I'm going to step through one day at a time. And this is for about 11 a.m. Mountain Time for each day. So this is for tomorrow. The warmer air from the Pacific pushes out. You can see the pushing out, the fingers of warmer Pacific air coming into New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming here, even into western Nebraska and South Dakota. Little fingers of warmth. The Arctic air retreats up along the east slopes of the Rockies, but a lot of the U.S. is pretty cold. So yay, we warm up. But by Saturday, with that Pacific wave coming through, it draws back in the colder air. By Sunday, the colder air starts to deepen. You see how there's more purple here? Then by Monday, oh boy. So by Monday, you're getting big anomalies. You're looking at anomalies between 30 to 40 degrees more below the 30-year average. So where you see the purple, your single digits or your sub-zero. So you see how there's a bit of a west to east lobe of extremely cold Arctic air backing up across the north central United States. Look at the temperatures by Monday morning. These are lows. Overnight low temperatures, Sunday night into Monday. This area right here is the pocket of just extremely cold air. That's where the deep pocket of cold air is. By Tuesday, there's a west and southwest expansion of the Arctic air up against the divide. These are the lows Tuesday morning. See how this area is expanded and it's further west and south? So we're starting to get sub-zero temperatures all the way down into southeastern Wyoming and the Front Range and plains of Colorado into northern Kansas. By Wednesday, all the way down to the Gulf Coast of Texas. So just this pocket of Arctic air just spills in. Look at the whole nation. The whole lower 48 goes back to severe cold again. These are the overnight low temperatures by Wednesday morning. Look at this, minus 25 in Burlington, Colorado. For mid-February, that happens, but that's very cold. Sub-zero temperatures to the Texas panhandles, and look at this area right here. Montana and northern Wyoming again. I'm sorry, you're just, yikes. Severe cold, and it's going to settle in. There's probably some minus 40s coming next week into those areas. By Thursday, you see these fingers? So by Thursday, we're starting to see it come off the east slopes of the Rockies here. We're starting to see a little bit of a Chinook wanting to push the Arctic air back into the nation's midsection. So this is going to be impactful for the heartland of the U.S., the northern and northern plains and north central Rockies. There's kind of the artifact of that Arctic wave. It gets all the way into Nebraska, all the way. Look at minus 29 in Kansas. Will it be minus 29 in Kansas? This is a model, maybe. But I'll tell you this, if there's snow on the ground, and there is, and there's going to be a little bit more, well, that's possible. It's possible. It's in the realm of possibilities. And you can see the extent by Thursday morning of the sub-zero temperatures across the U.S. wherever you see gray there. The blue shading is where it's severely cold. And there won't be a lot of snow, but the Arctic wave will be overrun by Pacific moisture. So this is snowfall from Monday through Thursday of next week. So be prepared. Now, I want to talk about March. So what we're going to do here is we're going to stick our neck out a little bit, but when we try to do a long-range forecast, we can look at the models, and that will tell us what the models think. We can also look at what we call the analog technique, which is, well, let's look at the models, but also let's look at the big picture items that we know there's a strong correlation with how a weather pattern may emerge if certain features are in place. So once this current Arctic wave that happens next week occurs, what we're going to see is a warm-up. We're going to see a bit of a thaw before February ends. What I'm showing you here is a 45-day forecast of what's called the Pacific North American Oscillation, better known as the PNA. We call this a teleconnection. And there's a pretty strong correlation with what we call the PNA and how the weather will evolve in the Western United States. We talk about the Eastern Pacific Oscillation. We've got other ones we talk about. But this one is going to highlight really well what's going to happen. When we see it in a negative phase, you're going to have stormy, colder weather in the western and central United States. When you have a warmer or positive phase, you're going to be warmer and drier. So what's going to unfold here is this is where we are right now, okay? So this is being influenced by this vortex, the Arctic air. So this basically takes us through all of next week. The PNA is negative. The PNA goes into a positive phase right around the weekend of the weekend after this one, so to speak, and into the end of the month, right up to the beginning of March. You see this phase right here? So this is when we have a break. We should see warmer air flood from the Pacific into the west. So after next week, we get relief. However, notice how all of these lines go negative right around the 3rd, 4th, 5th of March. And then they generally stay negative till the 29th, or basically for the rest of March. So this is a cold, stormy signal once we get into the first couple of days of March through the rest of the month. Okay, that's signal number 1. We talked about stratospheric warming trends that can assist Arctic outbreaks. When the stratosphere gets warmer at the high latitudes, that assists Arctic outbreaks. That's exactly what's happening right now. A stratospheric warming event has been ongoing during this latest cold wave, and you can see the warm stratosphere right here, the cold stratosphere right here. Look what happens as we go through time. This is why we want to put all these pieces together. So this is now. This is by next weekend. Notice they get a stratospheric warming event on the other side of the northern hemisphere. So that's where the cold's going. It's going to go into Europe. It's going to go across the North Atlantic. This is part of that change in the weather that gets warmer after this weekend, right around that time frame into the last 5 or 6 days of February. This is going to help assist with the warm-up. Notice, though, this little pocket where the stratosphere is getting warmer here. That's important later. Then look what happens at the end of February. This area right here grows, expands. So right at the beginning of March, at the end of February, we have another stratospheric warming event. Now, stratospheric warming events happen through the course of the winter. A lot of times by March or April, you don't see them anymore, but this is right at the beginning of March. So this is another cold signal. So we've got 2 coming together, and stratospheric assists, a lot of times, they don't always have a direct connection to cold outbreaks, but they certainly have this year. The other factor is, what's La Nina doing? The latest sea surface temperature anomaly still shows La Nina in place in the central Pacific, but it's getting cut off and weakening rapidly right here. And this is an important area because La Ninas will go all the way to the coast here. So will El Ninos, but we're seeing an erosion right here. In the last 7 days, sea surface temperatures have really risen here. They're really rising in the central Pacific. La Nina is weakening, and it's weakening rather rapidly. And you can see this when we show you a couple of graphs. So anything below this 0.0 would be considered La Nina, especially anything that's lower than 0.5. So overall, the La Nina is in place, but look what's happened since right into the last days of January. There's a sharp rise in the anomaly, okay? So it's weakening. If we look at the eastern side, near the coast of South America, look at this rapid trend. It's actually gone positive. So La Nina is on the way out, and I think it's weakening maybe faster than predictions showed us. The latest European model is showing this for the month of March, that by the end of March, there is no La Nina. It's fading away very rapidly. A fading La Nina right at the start of the March, April, May timeframe is another cold and also stormy signal. So that's 3. We've got 3. Let's look at previous years with sea surface temperature anomalies and La Nina when La Ninas fade just about this time. So this is as the 9th of February. You can see this is another way to analyze the sea surface temperature anomaly. So it's still there, weakening here, but you can see there's little holes in it forming right here. If we go back and look at March 2021, now a lot of you will say March 21, there was a huge snowstorm in March of 21. Yes, I'm not saying there's going to be a huge snowstorm in March. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. But we saw a similar situation. I bring up 21 because we were going from a very strong La Nina to a weakening La Nina that year. And so for March 1st of that year, I'm using March 1st here as kind of the target date, there was a La Nina. It was stronger than the one is now, but it was also showing signs of weakening here. 2023, a lot of you remember the winter of 2023. 2023 was another La Nina weakening into March, April, and May. And you can see there's some similarities here with it fading right at the end of February into the beginnings of March. So if we go back and look at some analogs, we see that In 21 and 23, we had a pretty stormy March. We saw weakening La Niñas during the same time frame, and we've got the stratospheric warming event happening right at the beginning of March. If we go back and look at some analog years, another analog year is to look at the March-April timeframe of 1984. And if you look at the temperature anomaly for the lower 48, you can see that almost the entire nation had below average temperatures for that 60-day period. So when we look at previous years, previous patterns, previous situations of a weakening La Nina into the start of spring, throw on top of that a stratospheric warming event, that could end up meaning that March into April could have a lot of weather. It could be colder than average in many areas, and if you're colder than average in March and April, you're going to have systems coming off the Pacific producing weather events. So I think we're going to have a much more busy March than last year for certain, probably April as well. And when we do take a look at some of the modeling, that is also showing up, and that's something we'll look at tomorrow. Have yourself a very good Thursday. We'll see you tomorrow.